Here is the voice of the working class, Rick Smith.
And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here. Today on the big program, lots to get to. Lots to talk about. Rupert Murdoch in the news a little bit. Rupert's got a little attention because evidently did a little deposition thing. Where the lawyers tell you probably shouldn't lie. Probably shouldn't do what you do on that thing you own on the little idiot box. Maybe you shouldn't maybe. And this is what I've been saying. When people go into that courtroom, put their hand on that book they say they love so much, swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So help them God, or more likely, perjury. They say some interesting things. They do. Rupert acknowledged he misled the public over the election fraud stuff. All of that big lie that it was just fuming out of them. They were just lathering out of the mouth. His quote was, "I would have liked us to be stronger in denouncing it in hindsight." You think? You think you're being sued for a couple $1 billion? You think you might have wanted to, I don't know, tell your hosts maybe don't lie? Maybe don't keep pushing a false narrative that everyone knew is true. And look, they still are. There's still people who are doing it. This is the thing that gets me. Now, Rupert confirmed what I've been saying all along. And in fact, he did it verbatim. This was the part that my producer sent me a text going verbatim, word for word, as it would come out of my mouth. He was asked, "Why do you keep letting Mike Lindell on Fox News? Why do you keep bringing this guy on?" And he said, "Yeah, it's not about red or blue. It's about green." And you go, yeah, this is what it's all about. It's what it's always been about. And I've told this story numerous times over the years of going to these talkers conventions where you meet all of these big name right wing talk show hosts, and they don't believe half of what they blather. It's all a matter of what's the sale. How can they monetize every segment and it's not about news, it's not about information, it's not about provoking thought, it's not about none of that. It's about keeping people's ears to the radio and selling them stuff. It's about monetization. And because again, it's not about for them right or wrong, it's not about blue or red, it's about green. And the reality is, and I've said this before, it isn't about the truth. It's about how they can lie to us. And for instance, will you hear on Fox News what happened in Georgia? Will you hear about SB 202 and how it gave just any idiot the ability to challenge thousands of people's votes? Let's talk about voter intimidation. Let's talk about fraud. Let's talk about that. Do you hear it? No. In fact, they're reporting that 92,000 people had their votes challenged by just people deciding, I want to challenge someone's vote, because there's no repercussions. I can go and challenge every voter in my neighborhood if I lived in Georgia, and there would be no repercussion. I would make them have to go through a whole process of defending themselves, and again, no repercussion. And what they found out is, of the 92,000 challenges, there were only a handful that actually worked out to be challengeable. The rest of them were just gumming up the system. The rest of them were just making busy work for county officials and making people defend themselves. And this is the part that's really just amazing to me. And now this group, Fair Fight Action, they're going into federal court to sue, saying that there was this coordinated effort by these groups to challenge 364,000 people's votes. And look, you know who they were challenging. They were challenging the places that had the highest population. Where those people are. But, here's the thing. I mean, that's never going to get into the ears of the fake news people. And as I've said before 1,000 times, the reality is they're the Winston Smiths of the 21st century. They're look, up is down, black is white, right is wrong, war is peace, freedom is slavery, ignorance is strength. This is 1984 on steroids. Because if you remember, Winston Smith's job, his job was to make yesterday's news fit today's narrative. Now the reality is none of this stuff they're gonna tell their viewers. It's the reason that Trump loves the poorly educated. And the thing that gets me is there's all of this information that we're now finding out that there was a lot of coordination between our media and these campaigns. For instance, in these court filings, Dominion is claiming that they've got evidence that Rupert Murdoch and them provided Jared Kushner with advanced copies of Biden's ads before they were made public. And you go, well, what's the big deal? It's to me not, but it just shows that whose side they're on. They're not on the side of fair and balanced. They're on the side of the green, and the right wing pays, and pays a lot. And again, this is all stuff we've always known. Nothing here, nothing to see. Move along, because the people who need to see it, never going to see it. Because why? Well, they're watching the F channel. And look, and even if they do, there's this cognitive dissonance. There's this, no, they're never going to believe it. And as I said, this is the Winston Smith of the 21st century. And if you don't know who Winston Smith was, he was a character in the book 1984. His job was to go back and destroy yesterday's news and rewrite yesterday's news to fit today. That's what his gig was. And this is what the F channel and their minions do. For instance, last week, I joked. This is what I was kidding. Understand, I was kidding. But if you know how the F channel works, if you know how the right wing works, it's all about fear and smear and all about keeping people afraid. I joked that MS-13 was going to be coming back, didn't I? You all heard me. Yep, MS-13 will be back any day now. Well, Fox News ran a story last week, 2 days ago. Behind bars, thousands of criminals, including notorious MS-13 gang members, start filling mega prison in El Salvador. We had to go to El Salvador to get a story about MS-13, but it was back. It was back. And here's the thing. Lauren Boebert, Republican mouthpiece, she tweeted out, "This is how you handle criminal gangs like MS-13. Much better to have them end up at our southern border." Because she was, quote, tweeting this story of how these gang members and how these people were treated in the prisons in El Salvador. Now you look at them and they're young men with tattoos, and you go, "Oh, those are all MS-13 members. We should be afraid of all of them." And if you listen to the actual reporting, which you don't do, because heaven forbid you actually understand what propaganda and fear you're throwing at. Even in the report said that, many believe that, a large number of people who are being rounded up, just because they look like this, aren't even criminals. So I threw out this tweet going, this is the fantasy world that conservatives want. They want to be able to just round up whomever they don't agree with, whomever they don't like, throw them into prisons and treat them poorly. Constitution be damned. Now look, and if all I get is, well, you want criminals to come and do all this stuff. Wait till they rape your children. And nobody is saying I want criminals on the street. But if you believe in that Constitution thing that you talk about believing in fact, that some still do carry it around as a decoration. Like in the old days, used to wear a flower in their suit coat. Now they've got the Constitution that they never read, but they've got it. It's right there. It looks pretty. It's a nice decoration. If you believe that everyone has the right to due process, everyone has the right to a day in court, all this stuff. So immediately they go, well, that's not how you liberals treated the January 6th political prisoners. I'm going, woo, what? They're political prisoners? They broke the law. They were charged with actual laws. They've had their initial day in court. They had the charges read to them. They got representation. They've been able to go through the court processes. The fact that it's taking a long time is, hey, welcome to the U.S. justice system, that the wheels of justice grind slowly. And you signed away, in many cases, your right to that quote-unquote speedy trial, which could be who knows how long, again, considering how long these things take. And then going to jail, those jails that you said were supposed to be much tougher, you realize that they're not Club Med. Oh, whiny white people. Quite amazing. But it comes back to this, being, the stuff that people are force-fed daily over there at the outrage channels. Cable news, right-wing talk radio, it's all about the outrage. And, a perfect example of this delusional kind of thinking and reporting, look at the train derailment. Perfect example. You had the anti-Republican, anti-regulation, anti-government Republicans, screaming, "Where's our government?" What? You spent decades deregulating and taking the ability to do anything away, and yet complaining. Now, here's the thing. The mechanisms worked as they were supposed to. EPA was on the ground within hours. You had NTSB there. All the alphabet organizations were there and responding the way they were supposed to. Government was working exactly as you would expect it, exactly as it's supposed to. Yet you listen to the right wing, they're losing their mind, because understand what they're doing. They're providing cover for Norfolk Southern. All of this stuff is about putting blame on Buttigieg and on the government. Oh, he didn't respond fast enough. Nope. All the organizations that were supposed to be on the ground were on the ground. Did exactly what they were supposed to do. Now, the fact that the governor dropped the ball a number of times and didn't ask for help when he should have immediately, that's never brought up. Because again, that's their team. Now, I admit, I think Biden dropped the ball. Message-wise, the political PR part. But as far as getting people what they need, how they need it and all that, sorry, it's how this works. It's how, for my 10thers, for the people who tell me how much they love the Constitution and that 10th Amendment thing, this is a states' rights issue. The states should be taking this and running with it. And if they need help, they request it. That's how this works. I know it's difficult. But you had Lauren Boebert, who tweeted out today that House Republicans will be launching a probe into Buttigieg's non-response to the train derailment in East Palestine. This other dereliction of duty cannot be normalized. People are suffering. And I'm going, wait a second. All of a sudden now Republicans care about these communities? All of a sudden Republicans now care about individuals? And oh my gosh, they care about workers? And the F channel too? Oh my goodness. Can you believe it? And the answer is, here again, it's all about projection. It's all about deflection. You don't hear him talking about Norfolk Southern. You don't hear him talking about the railroad's decisions not to listen to the warning signs. You don't hear him talking about deregulation of the braking systems. You don't hear them talking about slashing the workforce and all of the things that have happened over the last couple of decades because of this regulation fetish that the Republicans seem to have. We need to cut. If you remember during the Trump years, he used to brag. He was going to cut 22 regulations for every new one. You don't hear that. You hear the deflection. You hear it's all government bad. But understand, the government did exactly what it was supposed to do. It operated the way it was intended. Now, again, I go back to, I think Buttigieg and Biden dropped the ball. If it were me, I would have had an army of people lined up at the Pennsylvania border ready to go in. I'd have taken pictures of it. I'd have had, all of the optics, the displays. We would have had patriotic music. There would have been all this stuff because evidently that's what we want. We want the show more than the results. At least that's what it appears. Love to hear your thoughts. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Gonna take a quick break right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
We are AFGE, the American Federation of Government Employees. We represent 700,000 federal and D.C. government workers who are the vital threads of the fabric of American life. We support our nation's military. We take care of our nation's veterans. We protect our nation's borders. We respond to our nation's crises and natural disasters. We provide services to our nation's seniors. The American Federation of Government Employees. We work for America.
We are AFGE, the American Federation of Government Employees. We represent 700,000 federal and D.C. government workers who are the vital threads of the fabric of American life. We support our nation's military. We take care of our nation's veterans. We protect our nation's borders. We respond to our nation's crises and natural disasters. We provide services to our nation's seniors. The American Federation of Government Employees. We work for America.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So over the weekend, I had, you ever fallen down one of these rabbit holes and you think about something from the past? Like when you were a kid, you remembered somebody, like a baseball player or a football player. You go, I wonder whatever happened to them. That's the great thing about Google and Wikipedia is, there's every athlete or every person I've ever thought of and gone, hey, I wonder what happened to them. There's always something where you go, oh, this is what they're doing or how life turned out for them. And I was reading about the 1980 U.S. hockey team, the Miracle on Ice. And I remember it like it was yesterday because it was in the heart of that period where I was playing hockey. And it was part of my passion at the time. And I remember being able to stay up late and watch the games because, again, time change. They were on late in the evenings, and I remember those guys, Ruzioni and Craig and Johnson and all those guys. And as I was going through the list, I said, let me take a look and see where some of those guys are. And I came across Mike Wells, who I do remember playing in the Olympics. A guy who drafted by the Canadiens in 1977, played in the NHL for a couple of years in the early 80s. But as I'm reading about, his life after hockey, here's a guy who went and was a manager of a restaurant, ended up, blowing out his back, moving crates as the manager of a restaurant, unloading a truck. He fractured a vertebrae. And when they did surgery, they found out he had this rare degenerative spinal disease. And it was all downhill from there. And you go, Mike, that's horrible. Here's a guy who, was at the pinnacle of notoriety, a hero, if you will, to some. And I found the part where it said that he had to sell his gold medal because he couldn't get health care. He had to, in order to get the care he needed, he had to sell his freaking gold medal. And the part that really just infuriated me is he sold it for $40,000. And the guy who bought it went and auctioned it off for like over $310,000. I mean, he didn't even get what it was worth because he was desperate and needed the money when he needed it. And it was one of these things where, I read his statement. He said, it killed me to sell the medal, killed me. But my life was crumbling. I was going to lose my home. I needed to sell it to have surgery and to live. I had no choice. And that it was one of those things that just stopped me because this is a guy who was really, he was a national hero. The receptions, I remember the parades and all the glory that was bestowed. Now and I couldn't help then thinking about all of the nobodies, all of the people like me, all of my friends, all of the people who, what if that happened to them? There's no medal to sell. There's no notoriety to try and fundraise off of. There's just pay or die. And again, I come back to this as just in the richest country in the history of civilization, at its wealthiest moment, we should be doing better than this, especially for what we spend on healthcare. And I look at this report just put out by health insurance watchdog Wendell Potter. Interesting numbers he's come out with. He claims that big insurance revenues and profits have increased over the last decade 300% on revenue, 287% on profit. We spent in 2022 $1.25 trillion in the big private insurance world, in the big insurance world. Their profits are almost $70 billion. That's $70 billion that didn't go to CEO pay, executive pay, those cute little commercials and advertising you see all over the place. That's almost $70 billion after all of their expenses that people paid into and, well, didn't get care for. And you look at it and you just go, how's that possible? And you go and you look at that prescription drug bill and the drug prices that we pay in this country. They pointed out that a huge part of this increase has to do with pharmacy benefit management. These pharmacy business management companies and Medicare replacement plans, the Medicare Advantage stuff. They point out that for-profits now control 80% of the national pharmacy benefit management market, 80%, and 70% of the Medicare Advantage market, and it's going to get worse. They also point out that Cigna, one company, now gets more revenue from its pharmacy benefit management than its health plans. CVS gets more revenue from its PBM than from either Aetna's health plans or its nearly 10,000 retail stores. It's all about the drugs, man. It's all about the drugs. And the thing that gets me, and I was thinking about this over the weekend, I knew a guy years ago. They used to be an advertiser with our show in the past, from the big colored cross and shield people. You know who I'm talking about? I'm not going to say the name, but there's a color, and they have like a cross there, and they're carrying a shield. I'm sure you've maybe you can put that together. Who told me that one of the biggest mistakes that the insurance industry ever made was opposing Medicare. So one of the biggest mistakes, because they were against it, dead set against it. Again, this was years before the Affordable Care or the Obamacare and Medicaid expansion, years before that. And he said, look, he understood, private insurers could administer these programs like these Advantage plans. Of course, taking their cuts and having the government as the backstop. It's a perfect scheme, because we, the people, are always the backstop in all of these schemes. And, he said, look, we could have had a public-private partnership where the government mandated everybody's into this and the private corporations would then run it. And, of course, we would squeeze our profit out of it and, do all the things that they do. And he was honest. He goes, look, we deny a lot of claims. And this is a part of the whole profit process. So, that's stuck in my head when I'm seeing these numbers going, how much care, they got $70 billion in profit. How many people didn't get the surgeries or the health care that they needed? How many Mike Wells out there who have to sell their prized possession just to get the care that they need to live? And I know, Rick, it's a rough world out there. Pay or die. How important is your life to you? I get it. But don't you think we can do better than handing almost $70 billion in profit to an industry that does nothing but shuffle papers around and deny us what we need? I think we can. I think we can. I want to hear your thoughts. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. If you missed any portion of the program, make sure you grab the podcast. Wherever you get your favorite podcast, you'll find ours right back after this. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1937. That was the day, with whistles blowing, the call to strike could be heard through the aisles of Woolworth in downtown Detroit. 108 saleswomen walked away from their workstations and cash registers. The 8-day sit-down had begun. The women saw from the experience in Flint that sit-down strikes were effective. They evicted management, barricaded the doors, and found 200 or so customers still inside the store wanting to join them. The strikers issued their demands: a 10-cent an hour raise, an 8-hour workday, union recognition and a union hiring hall, free uniforms and laundering, and more. Kresge department stores immediately gave their workers a raise in order to prevent similar stoppages. The striking women at Woolworth made themselves comfortable, and the sit-down soon spread to a second store. Leaders from Local 705 of the Hotel Employees and Restaurant Employees Union threatened a nationwide strike if demands were not met. Union cooks provided meals, and union musicians provided entertainment. Hotel workers from across the city picketed in front of the store in a show of solidarity. After 7 days, Woolworth's management caved and agreed to most of the strikers' demands. High turnover in the workforce would undo contract gains at area Woolworth stores soon after the sit-down. But the victory electrified retail workers across the country. The sit-down spread to retailers in St. Louis, New York, San Francisco, Minnesota, and Washington. In 3 strikes, miners, musicians, sales girls, and the fighting spirit of labor's last century, Dana Frank notes that, quote, over 60 years later, unions today in department stores all over the country owe their existence in part to the Woolworth strike. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
Stuff happens, right? I mean, who could have thought that in these modern times of digital monitoring of everything, something as massive as a freight train could become a toxic fireball rolling undetected and unslowed into an Ohio town? But a Norfolk Southern train did just that, derailing in East Palestine and contaminating the air, water, land, and families with tons of cancer-causing chemicals. Gosh, exclaimed Norfolk Southern. Gosh, exclaimed the Ohio governor. Gosh, exclaimed the U.S. Transportation Chief. Gosh, exclaimed the GOP chair of the Rail Transportation Committee. This is a terrible, unexpected accident, and we're all appalled by it. Only, all of these officials knew full well that this disaster would happen, though they didn't know exactly where. Indeed, far from unexpected, there are more than 1,000 preventable train derailments in the U.S. every year. Norfolk Southern had another one only days after the one in Ohio. And these things don't just happen. They're caused by the profiteering greed of the monopolistic industry's top executives and rich investors. While Norfolk's boardroom elites have been pocketing record profits in recent years, they've used armies of lobbyists and multi-million-dollar political donations to kill safety protections that would prevent such a disastrous record. To cut costs and jack up profits, railroad bosses have rigged the rules to run trains that are absurdly long, go too fast, carry undisclosed toxics in weak tanker cars, have no fire detectors, use outmoded braking systems, and have as few as one crew member on board. One. This is Jim Hightower saying Norfolk's derailed train was made to derail. It pulled 149 cars stretching nearly 2 miles down the track, and it was ill-equipped to detect fires and other problems. This disaster was not an accident. It was mandated by the corporate and government officials now professing outrage.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So one of my favorite tweets today coming from Marjorie Trainwreck Green. She tweeted out, "Temperature of America. Americans do not support the war in Ukraine at all and are very turned off with Washington for funding and pushing the war." She said, "We want peace. And Americans support a national divorce into red states and blue states with a small, limited federal government." And my first thought was, is she using her head as a rectal thermometer again? I mean, seriously, I know no one who's buying on, no one of any sane, rational capacity to think, thinks that there's a possibility of a national divorce. Crazy, crazy times. Anyway, big day tomorrow in Illinois, the Chicago mayoral race. And here to share some thoughts on the big race, I've asked our good friend Joan Esposito to come talk with us. She's the afternoon radio host over at WCPT AM 820, our progressive affiliate in Chicago. Joan, thanks for taking time for us.
Anytime. Anything for you, Rick.
So let's start with Marjorie Trainwreck. Thoughts on the national divorce? Are we in favor? Chicago ready to to do off with the rurals and continue this urban rural thing that's going on?
Here in Illinois, downstate, people who live downstate, for years, they've said that they would like to secede from Chicago. They would like to cut Chicago and make it, I don't know, its own state or just set it adrift. I'm not sure which. So that's a real familiar argument here.
Yeah, it's not
and
new.
frankly, here's the thing about Marjorie Taylor Greene and her divorce. If it were as simple, like if we could get all of the crazy people to go to Texas, I'd be more than happy to cut Texas loose, or Florida. You pick. I don't care what. But the problem is we've got blue and red in most states.
Yep.
So it isn't there's not a clean divide here. So I say we get all of them to move somewhere and then we cut them loose.
But that's their thought. In fact, I had a couple people saying that, and they were very outward and honest about it, that all the black people would move to blue states because they're all lazy, evidently, according to these people. And then it would be perfect. It would be a utopian, white, red-ish kind of scenario.
Well, it does seem like that's what Ron DeSantis is trying to do in Florida. All you gay people, all you black people, the rest of us want you to know you're not welcome here. So you know what? You got relatives somewhere else in the country. Maybe it's time you move over and be closer to your family. I firmly believe that he would love to get rid of the people, his deplorables who are black and gay and anybody who opposes him.
Yeah, it's a weird time we live in. But the thing is, nobody's talking about that. The sad reality is, and I guess the reality, not sad reality, the reality is the red areas and the blue areas are dependent on each other for us to be this United States and to have the wealth and the prosperity that we've got. And nobody wants to admit that.
Well, those people in downstate Illinois who hate Chicago supports them financially.
Yeah.
They get more money from Chicago than Chicago gets back from the state. So I say, let's try it. Let's try it for a year. Let's just keep all the money in Chicago and we'll see how the downstaters like it after a year and they can weigh in.
See, I got into a little bit of trouble with this. A lot of people were attacking me because I said, the red states are welfare states. Because most of them, 8 of the top 10 welfare states in this country are red states. And I said, maybe we should pass a law that says you never can get more than you put into the federal government back. So if you spend $1, you get $1 back. You don't get 2, which is what we've been doing in a lot of these southern red states for far too long. It's time to cut the dependence. That to me, I think would send a little bit different of a message. But the problem is, I know who that's going to hurt. It's going to hurt poor working people. And I guess that's what they really want.
That certainly seems to be what their programs and policies are aimed at doing.
Yeah, it's crazy. I want to get your thoughts on the mayor race, since that's what you're here for. Really close. This normal for Chicago politics to have, you got 4 that are within a couple of points of each other. You got this Vallis guy with 24%, the incumbent mayor with 18, Chuy Garcia with 16, and the county commissioner Brendan Johnson with 15. And we'll see who comes out to vote, but it seems fairly close. Is it always this way?
The last polling I saw, actually, Paul Vallis had pulled ahead and he was in the mid-30s.
Oh, wow.
And everybody else was around 18 or 20. That's why the smart money, and I'm not sure it's smart, but the smart money is saying Paul Vallis is in the runoff. Just deal with it. He's in there, and he's either going to face Lori, Brandon, or Chuy.
Thoughts on Vallis? Some of the response that I've been getting from listeners, very worried that he's kind of an Arnie Duncan education guy, that we're going to see more
what's funny,
attacks
Rick?
on public education. Thoughts?
Paul Vallis and Arnie Duncan, Rick, don't invite him to the same party. That's all I'm saying.
Okay.
Unless you want fisticuffs and fireworks, don't invite them to the same party. They would kill you if you put them both in the same cup, because they see the world so very, very differently.
How so?
I have lots of thoughts on the mayor's race. Before it was the season where everybody was declaring, I used to have Paul Vallis on my show once a week, and we would do 2 hours, and we would sometimes debate things like, when kids should go back to school, if with the pandemic, what those parameters should be. We sometimes agreed on things like, why is Chicago taking for freaking ever to get rid of the lead pipes that are bringing water to some of these homes? But it was, when I first started this show, I wanted to not only talk to like-minded people, I wanted to talk to people who saw the world a little bit differently. But what I found was that a lot of the Republicans I would have on would lie to me. They would lie on the air. And then as soon as we would get off the air, they'd be like, oh, well, here's what I really think. And I hate Trump. And I was like, that's not the point. I'm not here so that you can toe the party line on my air. And the thing I like about Vallis, despite what you hear about him being a Republican, he is a Democrat, but he is a conservative Democrat. What does that mean? That means that he's not necessarily a supporter of John Catanzara, the Looney Tune head of the Fraternal Order of Police, but he is a supporter of the rank and file. He may or may not personally sign off on the idea of abortion, but as a politician, he's been endorsed repeatedly over the years by Planned Parenthood. He has never done anything except promote women's rights and women's autonomy. So progressives, oh my God, Rick, here in Chicago, they have their panties in such a wad that Paul Vallis is going to be not Ronald Reagan, because these days Ronald Reagan kind of looks like a Democrat, but that he's going to be like some kind of Ron DeSantis, even though when the Fraternal Order of Police announced that Ron DeSantis was going to come speak to them, within hours, Paul Vallis put out a statement saying that I condemn Ron DeSantis. I think this is a bad thing. I think he is a bad man, and I want nothing to do with it. What else can you ask of a guy?
Yeah.
So is he conservative as far as in the Democratic tent? Yes, he is. But he is, I like him. I like talking to him. I like when we disagree, when we agree. I feel like, he's somebody who not only just wants to tell you what he thinks, but he wants to listen.
Yeah.
He's a smart guy.
Yeah, I want somebody who's going to listen and be movable. I don't want the mayor from Wokistan. Sometimes the loony left goes off the rails. But I do want somebody who's going to stick to the idea that there are things that we should be doing for ourselves: public education, public investments, be a supporter of strong unions, that kind of stuff. That's for me where the heart of the Democratic Party is. And if you're a Democrat, those should be the things I'm worried about. Now, I'm told, and this is the only knock I've heard about him, and I've had a bunch of people reach out to me, the only knock is his stance on education. And it's the reason that I brought him in with Arnie Duncan. Because Duncan was one of the, in my view, one of the destroyers of public education with all this charter school nonsense. Is Vallis this kind of cut from this kind of cloth?
I've asked him about that point blank, and has he supported charter schools? He absolutely has. But when we used to talk, he's a wonk. He cites numbers. It's like, he's got all these numbers in his head. And what he will tell you is that when he was Chicago Schools CEO, enrollment increased in the public schools. He negotiated a contract with the teachers union. He seemed to be able to talk to them. He's a big believer in after-school programs. He's a big believer in making sure that what he would like to see is, especially in the underserved neighborhoods, job training programs. Get high school credit for an internship that you're doing downtown with Goldman Sachs or something like that. So does he support charter schools more than I would be comfortable with? Perhaps, but that doesn't mean that he would cut the legs out from public schools, because that's not what he did when he was the Chicago Public Schools CEO. He boosted them up, he made them better, and enrollment increased. It's the last time we've had an enrollment increase was when he was public school CEO.
So what's the knock?
Yes and no. I'm giving you a non-answer here, Rick.
Yeah, that's kind of a non-answer. But so what's the knock against it? Because you haven't said anything that I haven't heard from the education people. So what is the what's the knock? And then is there a positive in your view? What's he going to do that you think will be better than Lori Lightfoot? I shouldn't ask that because everything I see out of her has been bad in my view. But I like Chewy Garcia. I don't know Brandon Johnson, but I like Chewy. I would like to see Lori Lightfoot go. But what's the positive in him?
Well, here's the funny thing. I get all these newsletters and every progressive newsletter, and all the progressive newsletters that I've seen, it hasn't been, we don't like Paul Vallis because of X. It's just, oh my God, anybody but Paul Vallis, give us money. We've got to get to the streets. We don't care who it is, but it can't be Paul Vallis. Why? Just tell me why. Give me a specific thing about him you don't like. Because you and I have talked about what the basic negatives. Oh, he's a Republican. Well, he's actually not. He hates public schools. Well, he supports charter schools to a degree that I'm not comfortable with. But he also was great and lifted up the public schools when he led them. So give me a good reason. Tell me why you hate Paul Vallis, and then I will consider it. But the other two people you mentioned, I just interviewed Chewy Garcia today, and I think the runoff is going to be Paul Vallis and either Brandon Johnson or Chewy Garcia. I really do. But Chewy hasn't done himself any favors, not because of any policy failing so much as his own personal style. He's laid back to the point of where I think sometimes he gives the impression he doesn't really care. Oh, we'll talk about that. It'll be great. And one of them,
it'll be great.
One of the people
I've heard that before.
Yeah, one of the people I talk to on a regular basis, former Chicago Tribune columnist Eric Zorn, wrote this big thing about how he voted for Chewy Garcia, not because he likes anything about Chewy Garcia. In fact, there was a string, talk about damning with faint praise. He thinks he's mealy-mouthed and invasive and humbug and dull, but he voted for them for the sole reason that he thinks he's the strongest candidate to beat Paul Vallis. And Brandon Johnson is surging. Brandon Johnson, who's the Cook County Commissioner, who has also, until recently, been in the employ of the Chicago Teachers Union, which kind of disturbs some people a little bit, that he might be a little bit too tied to a union he's going to have to negotiate with as mayor. And the business community is not crazy about Brandon Johnson. I don't know if you've read much, but he's got a whole list of taxes that he wants to impose as mayor, and they almost all go after either tourists, suburbanites, or the business community. He wants to bring back a head tax, and the business community is like, are you kidding me? So we've got lackluster Chewy, controversial Paul, taxing Brandon Johnson, and then don't ever count Lori Lightfoot out.
No.
She's a scrapper, and it's so funny. She is recreating Fun Lori. That was in the beginning, she was Fun Lori, and then she became Angry Lori, and now Fun Lori is back. All these ads where she's dancing and smiling and shaking hands. And I came back from visiting my daughter in January, and for the first time ever, as I was waiting for my bags, I hear, "Hi, I'm Mayor Lori Lightfoot, and welcome to Chicago. We're like one of the greatest cities in the whole world." And I'm looking around going, okay, she's been a mayor for 4 years, and now, all of a sudden, she's recorded a greeting for the people coming in through O'Hare. Subtle, Lori, very subtle.
Interesting. Because, the news that I see coming out is, you got the homeless, I guess, sleeping in the airport and, all of these scandals, and it's all about, how she's failed. And I'm going, if you listen to Fox News, and before I let you go, I got to get your thoughts on the Rupert Murdoch deposition. But if you listen to the Fox, you listen to the right wing, Chicago is just a hell pit of fire and misery and homelessness and everything negative. And every time I've been to Chicago, it's been a great place. This is an editorial. I get the Wall Street Journal at home. Editorial, because of course Rupert owns it. Chicago news, nothing but crime. Nothing but crime. So, yeah, there you go. Nothing but crime. Before I let you go, I got to get your thoughts on Rupert Murdoch saying, the reason that he lets, someone like Mike Lindell continue to lie on air, and the whole reason that they continue with the big lie was it's not about red or blue. It's about green. At least he's honest. I got to give credit where credit is due when you're under deposition and under fear of perjury. They do occasionally tell the truth.
Well, what bothers me about it is not so much that he's admitting that he lied, which I actually think is kind of refreshing, but the fact that you care about that and I care about that, maybe my listeners and your listeners care about that, but the people who are MAGAs are either not going to be aware of that or they're not going to care. Nothing touches their belief system. Yes, Rupert Murdoch, yes, we lied. We knew we were lying. And we thought you were stupid, so we lied to you, and we knew you would like it. And they're like, yes, Rupert. Thank you, Rupert. Where can I sign up for a new subscription?
Exactly. I mean, that's, lie to me more.
Lie to me more, please, Rupert.
They love the poorly educated.
So, yeah, is it outrageous? Should it be front page headlines for the next 2 weeks? But it won't be, Rick. It won't be. Is it going to be a 1-day story? Maybe it'll be a 2-day story, but it wouldn't be unheard of for it to be a 1-day story because the MAGAs don't care. And the rest of it we're like abused children. We just take it.
That's the sad reality in this. But for me, the hope is that the 5 or 10% of the population that makes the decisions in this country, the least informed, least active, least engaged, least educated, that maybe they'll pay attention. And maybe those votes, that 5 to 10% that are disconnected, that they'll go, oh, hey, yeah, they were lying to us. And maybe they'll care. I don't think so, but maybe.
Yeah, you that's good. Cup half full guy, Rick. That's good.
I've never been accused of that.
Cup half full guy. We like that.
You're the only person who's ever accused me of that. So, before I let you go, prediction for tomorrow? Who are going to be the runoff people?
Well, here's what I think is going to happen. And this is going to be fun. It's possible that he's so far ahead that we will definitely know that Paul Vallis has the numbers to get into the runoff. But as you said, Lori, Brandon, and Chewy are running a very tight campaign. The Board of Elections has told us that there are so many mail-in ballots coming in, we might not know who Paul Vallis is running against until March 14th, which means Chewy and Brandon and Lori, if that happens, they have to keep campaigning. They don't even know if they're on the ballot, and they have to keep campaigning. You can't sit back for 2 weeks and then step in.
You know what's great about that? Comcast gets to make more money.
And so does CPT. Yay!
There you go. Joan, as always, great stuff. I look forward to having you back again. Always fun.
Anytime.
Thanks so much. Our good friend Joan Esposito, afternoon host over at WCPT AM 820, our radio affiliate on Chicago's progressive talk station. Want to hear your thoughts right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
The phone lines are open. Give Rick a call at 1-866-416-RICK. That's 1-866-416-7425.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1942. That was the day that 27 Japanese women working in the Seattle public school system handed in their forced resignations. In the aftermath of the attacks on Pearl Harbor, anti-Japanese hysteria swept the United States, especially the West Coast. 127,000 people of Japanese ancestry were sent to live in 10 internment camps by executive order of President Roosevelt. Many of these U.S. citizens sold their homes and businesses, often for a fraction of their value, before they were forced to move. In Seattle, mothers from Gatewood Elementary School circulated a petition for the removal of Japanese office employees from the schools. The school district pressured the women to resign. Even James Sakamoto, the editor of the Japanese American Courier, encouraged the women to voluntarily leave their jobs. He met with the women at the newspaper's office and told them they should resign before they were fired. Faced with such pressure, the women wrote a resignation letter. They wrote, "Most of us have received our education in local schools and have been proud of the fact, as we have been proud of our positions as employees." Word of the resignations quickly became headline news in local newspapers. Several protests were held in support of the women. Students at the University of Washington circulated a petition on their behalf. They gathered more than 1,000 signatures, declaring the treatment of these office workers undemocratic, intolerant, disrespectful of the rights of American citizens. In 1986, the governor of Washington signed into law an admission of wrongdoing toward these women and payment of reparations for their forced resignations. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
Tennessee Republican Representative Andy Ugles. Yeah, that's his name. He claims that he's a trained economist. That's right, trained economist. Now, look, there are a lot of people who pull things out of the dark side. Out of that orifice back there, that you go, oh, where'd you pull that out of? Well, we know. Turns out, I don't know what it is about Republicans and lying about their resume. I get padding the resume. I've been known to maybe exaggerate a touch, but there's always that, hey, you've got to defend what it is you're claiming. You've got to have at least some touch of reality. Evidently, him being a trained economist means he took one community college course and got a C. That evidently, in his world, is. Now, I don't know how you justify that. Like I said, I've taken 2 economy courses in college years ago, and this was back when they were still fighting over Keynesianism and the new neoliberal kind of. Give rich people everything they want, slash government down to nothing. So there was that kind of push-pull even at the time. This was late 80s. And I find it interesting that you have, Mr. Ugles, the trained economist. You got to see. That he's going to be one of the guys working on the Republican budget ideas. And the reports that are coming out is when they return, which is here very soon. Republicans of the House will return. They're planning on cutting $150 billion in what they call woke spending. Yeah, like education. We're gonna spend money on education. We're spend money on cutting. They're gonna cut SNAP benefits. In fact, we're coming to a benefit cliff here very soon. Where here in this state, I think they said 2 million people in the state of Pennsylvania are going to have their food stamps cut out completely or cut drastically. So make people go find on who are getting SNAP benefits. Prove that they're working. They're going to go after people, who are getting the earned income tax credit. We're going to go after that. They're going to cap the Obamacare at a lower level. They're going to cut EPA. No more spending for green vehicles. No legal assistance for those illegals. Things that are going to hurt people. Also stopping woke waste projects that focus on gender inclusivity. Because, you got to hate the gays if you're in the GOP. Or as I call them, the gay obsessed party. Very, very strange. But hey, when you've got economists like Ugles, you can claim these things are somehow good for us. Wow. Right back.
In no way, shape, or form will Norfolk Southern get off the hook for the mess that they created.
EPA takes control of toxic Ohio train derailment disaster 3 weeks later. Right-wing media tries to weaponize Ohio disaster into culture war fodder. Plus, surprise, the oil and gas industry has failed to cut climate warming methane emissions as promised.
All of those broken promises and more straight ahead. From BradBlog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
Trump, who is running in next year's presidential election, met with community members and local officials to get an update on cleanup efforts on the ground. As part of his visit, he also donated more than a dozen pallets of water and cleaning supplies.
Oh boy, a dozen. This is your Green News Report.
We're bringing thousands of bottles of water, Trump water, actually, most of it. Some of it we had to go to a much lesser quality water.
Okay, Desi Doyen, CNN is reporting that in the Ohio train derailment disaster, Norfolk Southern, the train company, is paying $6.5 million to help affected residents. Meanwhile, they note, the rail company paid its shareholders $7.5 billion. What, no Trump water as well to go with it?
Apparently not. The Biden Environmental Protection Agency asserted its legal authority this week to take control of the cleanup of the toxic chemical train derailment disaster in East Palestine, Ohio.
Finally.
3 weeks after the incident, the EPA announced sweeping enforcement actions against railroad company Norfolk Southern and compelled the company to pay the entire cleanup bill.
Good.
At a press conference, EPA Administrator Michael Regan said he knows the EPA cannot undo the nightmare visited on residents, but reassured the community that it won't be left to handle the aftermath alone after the news cameras leave.
Norfolk Southern will pay for cleaning up the mess that they created and the trauma that they inflicted on this community and impacted Beaver County residents. We're not going to leave this community to manage this aftermath alone.
Well, one might wonder what has taken them so long to get there. On the other hand, Ohio Governor Mike DeWine doesn't seem to have wanted the federal government there at all.
Pennsylvania's Attorney General has opened a criminal investigation into the company's actions. Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg also announced a package of reforms and asked Congress to untie the department's hands on enforcement, like increasing maximum fines for rail safety violations that are currently capped at just over $200,000.
Why is it the Pennsylvania Attorney General who's taking action here, not Ohio's Attorney General?
That's an excellent question.
Thank you.
Disgraced former President Donald Trump staged a visit to East Palestine, unintentionally highlighting his own record of slashing regulations on both rail safety and hazardous chemicals. The Trump administration repealed several rules on the grounds that the cost to industry outweighed any potential benefits, but an AP analysis found the Trump administration underestimated the costs of future derailments by more than $100 million. Republicans and right-wing media are trying to weaponize the derailment by attacking the federal response, but omitting, as noted, that Ohio's Republican Governor Mike DeWine still has yet to formally request a federal disaster declaration.
By the way, I hope someone has checked that Trump water for hazardous chemicals. Just saying.
The Biden White House countered that congressional Republicans and Trump officials, quote, owe East Palestine an apology for selling them out to rail industry lobbyists when they dismantled Obama-era safety rules.
It is darling that suddenly Republicans have decided to become so disturbed about all of this. Where were those same Republicans when people couldn't return to their homes because of the toxic air in Porter Ranch out here in California, thanks to the natural gas industry? Where were those Republicans when toxic lead-poisoned water was being fed to the town of Flint, Michigan? All of a sudden, when it's a bunch of Republicans who are affected by all of this with a Democrat in the White House, suddenly they decide to give a damn. Go figure.
In other news, a new report by the International Energy Agency finds that, surprise, the fossil fuel industry is failing to repair its methane leaks despite the industry's pledges to do so. The IEA says the oil and gas industry can cheaply reduce methane emissions by 75% using existing technologies, and it said halting non-emergency flaring and venting of gas into the atmosphere, quote, is the most single impactful measure countries can take. Methane matters because it is a more more potent climate-warming gas than carbon dioxide over a 20-year period.
I'm sure Fox News and all the Republicans are furious about all of that methane poisoning people around the country, right? For much more on all of these stories and the ones we couldn't get to today, check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. Find, follow, and share us planet-wide on the Facebooks, Twitters, and Mastodons at Green News Report.
Are you tired of think tank approved corporate news and commentary? Are you tired of CEOs telling you what to think, who to hate, and who to vote for? Well, welcome to the Rick Smith Show. We don't take orders from some boardroom, and we don't do focus groups or talking points. We don't work for them, and we never will. I'm Rick Smith, and I work for you. Join us daily at thericksmithshow.com and download the podcast and never miss a minute.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So the right-wing message machine is all Wuhan all the time. You've got Representative Byron Donalds going on about how evidently the Chinese have gotten away with, the Chinese Communist Party has gotten away with COVID-19, and it's the Biden administration's fault. Marsha Blackburn's going on about how the mainstream media has denied for years where the GOP was right about COVID labs in China. And I go back to, and I've had a bunch of people email me going, see, you were wrong. And I'm going, no, I'm not wrong. I never cared where it came from. I was talking about how do we deal with it now. We can find out later down the road how it transpired. But my goal at the time was, how do we keep people safe? How do we keep people alive? And how do I not die from this? But here to share some thoughts on the latest reporting on where the virus came from and who's responsible and what really does it matter in the grand scheme of things. I've asked our good friend Dr. Kelly Senholz to come share some thoughts. Dr. Senholz, thanks for taking time for us.
Hello, how are you?
I am good. So I wanted to get your thoughts on this. Evidently, the right is now all up in arms that Biden is letting China get away with the virus. My thought was what happened to Trump, but never mind. Thoughts?
Well, from the beginning, as you know, I was thinking the highest likelihood is that it came from the lab. If anybody has time, it would be great to Google Jon Stewart's interview on it.
Yep.
He
I
was
agree.
hilarious and said exactly what I thought. It's like the lab is named COVID Virus Lab. And it's exactly where the outbreak started. It's just too logical. As more and more evidence poured in, it became more and more likely that that was indeed the case.
But wasn't the argument then that at the time that it had somehow gotten disposed of and it came from the lab, but it was how it got disposed of? Wasn't that the argument at the time? And this is where I had conversations around this. Again, I don't know. I'm simply going, it makes sense that, yeah, they're working on it. Somehow it got outbroke. It got into the local whatever, and that's how it spread. So the question for me is, were there nefarious, was this China, doing, germ warfare? I think that's where this goes next. Or how do you see it? I guess we should pose that as a question.
We really have a problem because there is no way to rule out the case that they were preparing for some kind of germ warfare, but it's way too premature to say that's what it was. But they definitely, if this came from the lab, which it looks like it did, they were definitely doing some experiments that were strengthening the virus, playing with the characteristics of the virus. And if that's the case, I think it points out the fact that biolabs need a ton more oversight and a lot more attention by our State Department.
No, I completely agree with all of that. But here's the thing, and you're the medical professional here. I'm just a dumb truck driver. It seems to me that it would make sense for people who make drugs, who are thinking down the road, to want to be able to see what viruses can do in a controlled setting so that you can figure out how to maybe stop it. Does that make sense?
That's what they say. But if you look at the history of humans, it's quite concerning. Many people have a lot of confidence in nuclear energy, but obviously by where we place the nuclear plants, to how the plants are overseen, to nuclear plants that are in politically unstable nations, to, communists who rule in such a way they make them more unsafe. There's a million reasons why human beings cannot be trusted with this kind of thing.
Yeah.
And when I say cannot, there are smallpox viruses in many biolabs, to my knowledge, that, it's up to human beings and the ability of them to have electricity and political stability for those viruses to stay in that lab. This is a very high level concern that hasn't been given that concern.
No, I agree. Because for me, the idea of the Chinese using this as a weapon just doesn't make a lot of sense, because they got hit too. It's one of those things that can wipe out humanity if it gets bad enough. So it just doesn't seem like, and it doesn't seem like they were prepared for it. So is the argument, because I get a lot of this from my right-wing MAGA hat friends who seem to believe that this was done on purpose, that this was targeted towards us and towards the West. Do you see that as the possibility, that this was a targeted attack on us, which is where I think the Marsha Blackburns and the Representative Donalds want to take this? How do you view it?
It's one of the most horrible things when people who spew conspiracy theories end up saying something correct. And I think we're in a situation where, and they didn't mean to, don't get me wrong, they were probably doing it for nefarious reasons. But the fact is, we simply don't know that answer.
Yeah.
They could have been developing in it. We're very early in the process, and it escaped. More likely it was an accidental discharge, but with China obviously planning war, and they have a date on that war, you have to keep that into the realm of possibilities. By the way, Dr. Fauci never ruled out the laboratory as a source of the virus.
Okay, because I keep hearing the Boberts and the Marjorie Taylor Greens and all those voices saying Fauci's a criminal and all this because he lied to us, and I'm going, I don't remember that being the lie. I remember it being what I've always thought. I don't know where it came from. There are some strong possibilities. This lab being the center of it, and then was it done accidentally? Was it done for nefarious means? And at the time, my question is, what the hell are we doing in Wuhan, China, giving them money, to do this? Why are we doing this? Why are we putting this kind of power in those places? Is there a good explanation for that?
I think in the realm of this topic, it keeps their finger on the pulse of what the Chinese are doing. Okay. In other words, just like we did with economics, where we began trade with them, and it really eliminated their desire for war because they made money off of us. And in the realm of these biolabs, we don't want them isolated off and doing their own thing with no input. Obviously, they're not telling us the truth, and they don't always, they're not forthcoming with information. So at least we have people going in and out of the lab. Now, how cozy that relationship was, that's something we probably should know a lot more about. I think politically, one of the reasons for discounting the laboratory theory in the beginning was the fact that Donald Trump is crazy, and he uses anything to gain attention and notoriety and chaos. And I think honestly, a lot of people were just trying to keep us from ending up in World War III with China over the virus.
No, and this is the weird part of this, because I want you to take off the red hat or the blue hat This isn't about which side wins or loses. The reality is funding evidently was approved for this back in 2014. It was all because evidently there was some research done under the title of Understanding the Risk of Bat Corona Emergence. And I guess this was what people are pointing to as the beginning of this program during the Obama years. It was reauthorized with a 5-year grant under Trump in 2019, evidently, I guess a $3.4 million NIH funding grant directly from the federal government under Trump. And evidently, this Wuhan Institute got about 600,000 of it, which is why we keep hearing about this. So there's a lot of the red hats and blue hats are responsible. So for those who don't have hats on, what's the message out of this? Who's liable, who's responsible, and how do we make sure it never happens again?
Okay, first of all, I believe that you hear a lot of the conversation about the market theory coming from the scientific community. And I think they're afraid of losing funding. They're afraid of more regulations. The regulations have a huge cost. They add red tape to their research. They feel like they're doing a good job and they don't need oversight. But all of these ethical concerns and concerns about the development of superbugs or even another disaster like we just had are very valid concerns. And I appreciate the scientists' thoughts on that, but they're in a silo. They're in this world that the rest of us are not in, so we think about it differently than they do. And I think the normal average person has to say, we want safety with this. We need more State Department involvement in strict oversight of biolabs. And this is one thing I've been saying, is that the biolabs are technically more dangerous to humanity than nuclear weapons. Because as you can see, if they had released a virus that had a 50 or a 70% fatality rate, can you imagine what would have happened?
No, and look, there are conspiracy.
One nuclear bomb is not going to do that, but one guy walking out of a lab with a 2x2 stuck to the bottom of his shoe could do that.
Wow. So, but again, you listen to the conspiracy theorists, and this is what's happening. All this stuff is done for nefarious means. So I guess the other question that I have is, how many of these kind of labs do we have around the world? And
that is okay. You're hitting on the exact thing. We should have publicly available information on every single biolab in the world. We should be able to look that up and see who's in charge of it, where they're funding from, who is overseeing the lab, have there been safety errors. The lab that we're talking about had numerous safety issues prior to this, and it was run in what appears to be somewhat of a slapshod way. Those are the kind of things that without clarity and an open book, nobody can look at that and say, we need to pay more attention to this. It's a closed world. It's a dark silo. And obviously, if other countries are developing bioterror weapons, we're probably doing the same thing. And that's another political reason why maybe they don't want to talk about it. But as citizens, we should want to talk about it more.
Yeah, no, this is one of those scenarios if there's nobody responsible, if everybody's responsible. Because, again, the funding came out during the Obama years. It was reauthorized during the Trump years. But, again, my red hat friends, they don't want to blame Trump for anything and want to blame Biden for everything. And Biden just inherited the mess, which is why I find it interesting that everyone's pointing their finger that, they're getting away with it because Biden isn't doing anything. Again, it comes back to this red hat, blue hat stuff. And I want to go, how do I not die?
I think you're hitting on a really great point that I've also been saying a lot lately, which is we've got to stop thinking about this in terms of left and right, because really what it is corrupt or not corrupt. 70 to 80% of Americans will agree on almost any topic. And I would say probably 90 or 100% would agree that being safe from bioweapons or a bioaccident is a very important thing. So we all agree on it. And what we need is a government that is open and honest and accountable, and that we know what's happening and we have feedback on it. And the corruption is the thing that prevents that.
You're listening to the Rick Smith Show here with Dr. Kelly Senholt. We're talking about the Wuhan virus lab and the insanity around this. So let me ask you, how do we get to a point to where we put down the red hats and the blue hats? And because you're right, I think 100% of us agree. We want to know, where these super bugs are. And how do we get to that point? How do we put down the divisions and get to a point where, we're holding our leaders accountable? Because, in the red hat theory, and I think you've hit this perfectly, the red hat world is saying no regulations at all. It's the free market, let corporations and, the moneyed interests do what they want. We don't need regulation. And the blue hats, people, where I'll put myself, I want to regulate everything. And in this case, I want to over-regulate this so that this doesn't happen.
I think that this presidency is doing it little by little. When the train accident first happened in Ohio, they immediately went to task trying to blame the Biden administration, and certainly some of them still are. But the fact is that once it came out that Trump was the one that took those regulations away also, people are starting to put two and two together. And one by one, they're stepping back and going, maybe this isn't what I really wanted. And maybe they weren't aware of what regulations do for us.
No, I say this all the time, Kelly. You hear the Republicans yelling, job-killing regulation. And I'm going, hey, what happened to the people killing lack of regulation? So if I'm hearing you right, this is the prime example of lack of regulations literally killing people.
If you think about it this way, regulations are the way a society says how they would like something done. And it is annoying when there's too many regulations. It is annoying when there's superfluous regulations. We all have experienced that. It's super annoying. And we can fix that too. But the fact is, as a society, that's how we speak.
So I guess last line of questioning I've got on this. Do you see a way forward in given how divided we are, especially on this issue? Is there a way forward? Do you see that? Is there a possibility of Congress having a hearing and it not being a pie fight and policymakers actually coming forward and accomplishing something? Or is this just another one of those, many things that we've gotten into our silos, we bought our hats and our T-shirts, and we're going to be fighting over?
I think one of the things that should be happening is we need congressional hearings on biolabs and how they operate and what it is, and they can be in private if they need to be in private. But the problem is the people who can speak eloquently on that topic, who are working in the area, are a very elite, small group of people who have a vested interest in not talking about it.
Yeah. No, and nobody wants to endure the treatment that Fauci's gone under because, like him or not, the guy's taking kind of brutal abuse, and it's going to get worse as Republicans start doing these traveling road shows because they've already said they're going after him. And look, I don't know anybody who's going to want to replace him. I don't know anybody who's going to want to take these jobs down the road, especially given the fact that we just torture them.
They are definitely exhibiting a full-blown attack on science, on medicine, on education, on every kind of facet of our life that we have built over the last 150 years. Their goal is to tear it down. And the only path I see out of this quagmire is, they must be held accountable. And so here we are with a Department of Justice that seems to be stuck in the mud, and here we are.
So when you say
we're
they,
fighting it out with no support.
Right. When you say they, who do you mean by they? Because they
the
would be.
Department of Justice appears to be doing investigations. I see constant glimmers of hope that they're actually doing something. But the fact, real people are dying and real problems are happening in real time because the Republican crooks have not been held accountable.
So so the Republicans are the they in this, because my red hat friends would say it's all Fauci. It's all Fauci. It's all Biden. We were lied to. Trump couldn't possibly made a good decision because of Birx and Fauci all lying to him. He was at their behest. And of course, my liberal friends are going to say it's all Trump. If these investigations happen and we hold someone accountable, who is it? Is it all the Republicans' fault? Is it all the Democrats' fault? Where do you see this?
I think that as long as the Republicans are doing this, you can't expect a new Dr. Fauci to walk into the lion's den willingly.
Right.
What scientific group is going to want to put themselves through that and have death threats and God knows what else, loss of their career, loss of their finances because of lawyer fees? I mean, it's a nightmare. And so by their very persistence and refusal to stop this insanity, they are creating the very environment that prevents us from doing anything significant on this topic. I wouldn't recommend for people to do that to themselves, but then here we are just hoping that they're doing the right thing, and we don't know.
Yeah, we don't know. Because look, I know a lot of people who think the whole pandemic, everything's over, and I still have friends who are it was all a hoax. I guess I know I said last question, but maybe I got to ask this. Are we done with this? Is this over?
Oh my gosh, no. I mean, the amount of deaths from COVID has continued. The number of people getting long COVID is continuing. I do think the virus has mutated to be a milder cold, but that doesn't negate the outcomes. The 20-year-olds having heart attacks, the 30-year-olds dying suddenly of a pulmonary embolus or a stroke. This is happening, and often the patient's family never realizes it had anything to do with COVID.
Well, then I got to ask you, hold on, Nick, because my red hat folks will tell me that's because of the vaccine.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
No, my red hat friends will tell you that's the vaccine at work. That it's the jab. The jab killed us, Kelly.
Right, and they're just crazy, and I don't know what to say about that. They're continuing to be fed anti-vax information from the same people, and nobody has done anything. I shouldn't say anything. I'm starting to see some response from medical societies removing the licenses of people who are doing it. But the problem is they remove the license, but those people continue talking. They're on the lecture circuit making tons of money, writing books and all kinds of things. And because they waited so long to act, we're in this position.
Yeah, it's interesting to me that, again, you've got this whole cottage industry of denialism that makes so much money. It's a frightening moment of where we are. But Dr. Sennholz, I appreciate the time and the thoughts. I'd love to have you back again as this story unfolds.
Yep. Thank you so much. You have a wonderful evening.
You too. Thanks so much, Dr. Kelly Sennholz. Now, this is one of those moments where you just go, the red hats and the blue hats are throwing their narratives out there, and I want the truth. I want reality, and I go back to what I said from the beginning. I don't know where it came from. Makes sense. It came from the lab because that's where they were working on it, and it makes sense that we'd be doing this because these kind of you watch any of those bad '80s kind of movies. That there's always a nefarious plot to use a drug as or a germ as the end of humanity. That it just got out, and that's how my mind works. It got out, got into the fish markets or into the markets where they claim the wet markets, and that's how it spread. I don't know that I'm buying that it was released on purpose. I don't know, but I think investigations without the silos would be helpful. I just don't have any hope that it will. Quick break, right back. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1942. That was the day that 27 Japanese women working in the Seattle public school system handed in their forced resignations. In the aftermath of the attacks on Pearl Harbor, anti-Japanese hysteria swept the United States, especially the West Coast. 127,000 people of Japanese ancestry were sent to live in 10 internment camps by executive order of President Roosevelt. Many of these U.S. citizens sold their homes and businesses, often for a fraction of their value, before they were forced to move. In Seattle, mothers from Gatewood Elementary School circulated a petition for the removal of Japanese office employees from the schools. The school district pressured the women to resign. Even James Sakamoto, the editor of the Japanese American Courier, encouraged the women to voluntarily leave their jobs. He met with the women at the newspaper's office and told them they should resign before they were fired. Faced with such pressure, the women wrote a resignation letter. They wrote, "Most of us have received our education in local schools and have been proud of the fact, as we have been proud of our positions as employees." Word of the resignations quickly became headline news in local newspapers. Several protests were held in support of the women. Students at the University of Washington circulated a petition on their behalf. They gathered more than 1,000 signatures, declaring the treatment of these office workers undemocratic, intolerant, disrespectful of the rights of American citizens. In 1986, the governor of Washington signed into law an admission of wrongdoing toward these women and payment of reparations for their forced resignations. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
Stuff happens, right? I mean, who could have thought that in these modern times of digital monitoring of everything, something as massive as a freight train could become a toxic fireball rolling undetected and unslowed into an Ohio town? But a Norfolk Southern train did just that, derailing in East Palestine and contaminating the air, water, land, and families with tons of cancer-causing chemicals. "Gosh," exclaimed Norfolk Southern. "Gosh," exclaimed the Ohio governor. "Gosh," exclaimed the U.S. Transportation Chief. "Gosh," exclaimed the GOP chair of the Rail Transportation Committee. "This is a terrible, unexpected accident, and we're all appalled by it." Only, all of these officials knew full well that this disaster would happen, though they didn't know exactly where. Indeed, far from unexpected, there are more than 1,000 preventable train derailments in the U.S. every year. Norfolk Southern had another one only days after the one in Ohio. And these things don't just happen. They're caused by the profiteering greed of the monopolistic industry's top executives and rich investors. While Norfolk's boardroom elites have been pocketing record profits in recent years, they've used armies of lobbyists and multi-million-dollar political donations to kill safety protections that would prevent such a disastrous record. To cut costs and jack up profits, railroad bosses have rigged the rules to run trains that are absurdly long, go too fast, carry undisclosed toxics in weak tanker cars, have no fire detectors, use outmoded braking systems, and have as few as one crew member on board. One. This is Jim Hightower saying Norfolk's derailed train was made to derail. It pulled 149 cars stretching nearly 2 miles down the track, and it was ill-equipped to detect fires and other problems. This disaster was not an accident. It was mandated by the corporate and government officials now professing outrage.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So I think one of my favorite stories of the day comes out of Tennessee. The governor there, Bill Lee, about to sign the anti-drag queen bill because, hey, you know, they're against drag queens. And you know where this is going. Never ends well when I bring this up. Evidently, he himself pictured in his high school yearbook, 1977, page, 165, of yes, him in drag. And as my wife pointed out, he looked pretty good in drag. It looks like at the time there was a gender switch kind of thing that they had, because it looks like that whoever he may have been dating at the time was dressed like a man. He was dressed like a woman, short, really short skirt, too short for the era, I would add. But yeah, that's the hypocrisy. That will now be illegal in Tennessee. I wonder if you could make that crime retroactive. Maybe someone should throw that in. Anyway, here to share some thoughts on the top stories of the day, our good friend, former Ohio Congressman and political analyst, Bob Ney. Bob, thanks for taking time for us.
Well, thank you, Rick.
So were you ever in drag? Did you ever dress up like the, maybe when you were in high school doing the, hey, we're going to do cheer? Because I did. It was one of those things where I had a girl who conned me into it. You got one of those in your past?
No drag, no blackface, nothing. No, I didn't dress anything offensive to anybody.
Never for Halloween? Never did someone conned you?
No, no Halloween, Batman.
All right.
I guess I was mild. Now, we had at St. John's Central where I went, we had Follies and the football team, dressed up like hula dancers.
Yep. No,
came on stage.
Yep.
So now none of them ran for office that I can remember.
Yeah, most of them barely got out of high school, right?
Right. Well, one of them's an attorney, but
All right. Well, no, I just find it ironic that the very people. It's that pointing the finger thing. When they point their finger at you, they got three pointing back at them.
Well, the bill is, what is public? Because they're banning a place from taking place in public. So what is public? If you're out at a bar, is that a public venue? I assume.
And the other thing is what if you're
it's not private? Bars have private clubs, but then a public bar would be a public bar.
Yeah, and what about someone who's transitioning, dressing like a woman, but is still technically are we now going after them too? How far do these blunt laws go?
I mean, it's also it's so fuzzy as to where this takes place, and like you said, somebody dressing up. Now, this is what's getting me though. A violation of the law would be a Class A misdemeanor that has a sentence of 11 months and 29 days in prison. Subsequent violations would be classified as a Class E felony, punishable by up to 6 years in prison.
Wow.
People that beat up the police officer at the Capitol didn't get 6 years. Some of them.
Well, you know what's really important now, though, don't you?
So, and then the other thing is, for example, in Columbus, Ohio, there is a guy that dresses up in drag and he sells these cookies. Now, somebody might laugh, but I'm told he makes about $150,000 a year. But he did an event on TV. They featured it. So that was public. So if it was in Tennessee, he'd be arrested for being, I guess, on TV.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy where we're going. And look, I grew up in a time where, look, you had people who did this and nobody cared. Why is this? I mean, Tennessee is the 11th, what is it? They have the 11th highest poverty rate of any state in the country. And this is what they choose to do? This is insane to me. And I go back to, when I was a kid, this stuff happened. Nobody cared. It wasn't the end of humanity. It's crazy.
Right. I don't know. It's when you look at it and you look at the criminal penalties to it, and I think of other crimes people could commit. These sentences are frankly long sentences for this.
It's crazy. So if a third offense happens, are they going to be like Idaho? Because evidently Idaho is bringing back firing squads. Are we going to start lining them up and shooting them?
Well, obviously, if it's a second offense, you can get a felony and 6 years in prison.
Wow.
I mean, that's quite incredible.
Some good news, though. Evidently, the FBI has arrested Sedition Panda. Evidently, there was a guy wearing a panda head and a panda costume during the January 6th uprising. He has now been arrested.
Okay, that's the seditious panda, right?
Yep, sedition panda.
And he was because there was the one who had the bull's horn, or I don't know what they were, the horns on.
Yeah.
This is a panda costume.
This is a panda costume, which is, just kind of, I'm waiting for the law to come out. No panda costumes. No fluffies and, what do they call them? Plushies and furries? No plushies and furries.
I don't know. You know more about this panda topic than I do on the panda slang.
No, I just happened to see the story. Evidently, there's a guy they're calling, a seditious panda.
Sedition panda, right. And he had a panda head on. And his name's Rumson, I think it is. And he had the panda costume and the headpiece on throughout the riot. I guess he didn't want to be. Why would he have picked a panda? Can I ask that?
I have no idea. Maybe, I go back to, this is his plushy furry costume. Maybe he's into that stuff too. Because who just has one of those laying around?
The guy with the horns, okay, that's sort of a Thor thing. You know what I mean?
Yep, I get that.
It's a Viking thing, and he's attacking the capital. But the panda, I don't know. I mean, was that some anti-Chinese government statement, or what?
It's crazy. I got to get your thoughts on this, because I'm seeing a bunch of representatives down on the southern border, doing little videos about how, the Biden border is wide open. Marsha Blackburn said there are millions of people attempting to get into the country. And my take on this is, why are you down at the border? You should be doing your job in Washington, D.C., putting forth legislation on how we deal with this, because isn't this a congressional problem too?
Well, look, it is. It's. I've been to the border, and a lot of people, that have served in Congress have been to the border, and some haven't gone. And I would encourage people to go to the border to, talk to the border patrol. I went down. I saw people who had crossed, and they were in these glass confinements. They could stand up, by the way. They weren't, cages or anything. And the border police were saying, you see, there's 110 people here. They'll be sent back, and they'll be here, next week if you come. And so I think it should be of interest for people to see, not just who's crossing or how they're crossing or whether there's a fence or a wall or not, but also what happens to these people and how they're brought in, and, who makes the decision that they are, released or not released or flown back or sent back on a bus. I think that in itself is okay. But now, having said that and drawing attention to the issue, which is what their point is, eventually all of this, we can visit the border 900 times or not visit the border. Eventually there's got to be legislation where, people come together, and it is a mixture of security at the border, but also the dreamers, what you do with people, how you adjudicate asylum cases. I mean, eventually there's got to be legislation, or people will be going down to the border like when I was there and like they're still doing, and they'll be doing in 20 years.
Yeah. No, I mean, the reality is, look, I don't want to see the kind of humanitarian crisis that keeps popping up there. There's got to be some, this is what we're doing. But yet I don't see that. I see lots of people screaming. I see lots of people on both sides, throwing their bombs, but nobody coming up with a way. Or is it just the reality that there is no solution here, that we can't fix this problem and it's always going to be with us? I mean, is that the reality?
Well, there are, I think, not perfect, but there are definite solutions that are better than what's happening now, and they're out there. Each side will have to give. One side, on the Democratic side, not all Democrats feel like this, but on the Democratic side, in general, there will have to be the issue of security at the border and how you set up laws to help people when they have legitimate cases, et cetera, and security. On the Republican side, they have to start to realize that, we're not going to just build a wall and nobody ever comes here. There's also a problem on the Republican side with Miller that worked, of course, for Trump, who used to work for John Shadegg, the congressman from Arizona, and he he doesn't believe in immigration, period. He doesn't believe in any legal immigration. He doesn't believe in students coming here. He believes in none of that. And that has begun to grow within the Republican side. That has to be dealt with. And foremost, the Dreamers.
Yeah.
I mean, that is an easy, Rick, as you know, that's an easy one to cherry pick for the Republicans.
Yeah, that's the low-hanging fruit. Absolutely.
It should be. Let me put it that way.
Absolutely. That's the low-hanging fruit. Because,
Right.
look, I think most people are like me on this issue. We don't want the doors swung wide open, and we don't want the doors slammed shut. So how do you have a system that's going to bring in the younger people that we need as a country to survive and to get, to keep the economy going? But how do we make sure that MS-13 and the real trouble and the gangs and the terrorists don't get through? There's got to be a way that happens. But too many people are on each of the silo sides.
I think there are ways, and there's today with the social media, there's records and tracking and things that can be used out there to see if people have been involved in certain things. But also, somebody's going to have to dig into the embassy side of this, because I've sent this information to D.C. to both sides of the aisle. There are people who are absolutely being turned down as we speak constantly all over the world that have married. They have 7 to 8 to 10 years of proof, tens of thousands of documentations of their calls to each other and visits and messenger on Facebook back and forth, and those married couples are being denied percentage-wise, and I still think they are, in droves. So somebody has to take a look at not just that border, but also what's going around the world.
No, it's an excellent point, and it's something that's never talked about. Everything is about the border.
Ever.
And the reality is, and maybe you know more about this than I do, but don't most people who are here in an undocumented fashion come legally? Don't they come on planes and trains and automobiles?
Well, sure, most of them do, but there are horrific cases that I personally know about of, like I said, married couples, students, tourists that are just ad nauseum being denied the ability to come here in a complete legal fashion. They own property over there. I mean, it's amazing how this has sifted through these embassies, and I think Miller had a big handle on it, and I still think a lot of it's going on. So, yes, there's the border crossings, but then most of the people, of course, are coming, by airplane. And then some of this has to be common sense. Cat Stevens, the singer.
Yep.
He was denied entry here.
Yeah, I can't remember his name. Yusuf.
Bizarre.
What was his name again?
Yusuf
Aslam or something.
Yusuf Islam.
There it is.
And because of that, it's like, oh, his name is Yusuf. There's Islam in it. We better turn him around. I mean, everybody knows Cat Stevens is dangerous, don't we?
Yeah. I like Cat Stevens. I love his music.
I like it. Peace Train, Morning Has Broken. Very dangerous songs, I guess, to America.
Yeah. No, the Peace Train one, most certainly.
Oh, Peace Train's the worst. Yeah, right.
Which leads me to the final thing I wanted to ask you about, the year anniversary of going into Ukraine. You've got Marjorie Trainwreck, going on about how we don't want to fight the war. We want peace, but we want a national divorce. Thoughts on what's going on in the area there?
With Marjorie Tree name?
Yeah.
I mean, you got me. I use that, by the way, other stations when they like it. And, I mean, she's so out there with all of this and the national divorce. And, we had that once. It was called a civil war. It's just, I don't know. I don't know how she continues to, get the attention. I guess it's a caucus. If somebody yells at her, I guess she doesn't care.
Yeah, she doesn't.
Just doesn't care.
Because, she's a social media, I guess I can't say that.
Political entertainment.
Yeah, we'll go with that. I'm not going to use the W word.
Right.
But, here's the thing. I think the majority of people want us to be supporting Ukraine so we don't have to fight the Russians down the road. If Ukraine falls, I see World War III around the corner. I see this as that kind of a linchpin moment that Russia will move on.
this is a milestone because Russia, and just this word alone that they used, there should have been a no-fly zone by all the members of NATO. There really should have been, which would have stopped the Russians. Nuclear. They used the word nuclear in regard to the Ukraine. That's unacceptable. And we're either going to fight this now or it's going to be fought down the road, because if they get to Ukraine, it would teach a lesson to, get something else, let's say Poland. Now, I still think, hopefully, there's hope that somewhere within Russia somebody says, okay, we've had enough, but who knows?
Yeah, it's interesting times indeed. Bob, I appreciate the time as always. Great stuff, my friend.
Thank you.
Our good friend Bob Ney. Want to hear your thoughts? Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. I'm going to take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. Listen to The Rick Smith Show. Are you tired of think tank approved corporate news and commentary? Are you tired of CEOs telling you what to think, who to hate, and who to vote for? Well, welcome to the Rick Smith Show. We don't take orders from some boardroom, and we don't do focus groups or talking points. We don't work for them, and we never will. I'm Rick Smith, and I work for you. Join us daily at thericksmithshow.com and download the podcast and never miss a minute. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1939. The U.S. Supreme Court ruled that sit-down strikes were illegal. If you're a regular listener of Labor History in 2, last month you may have heard how sit-down strikes had become an important tactic for workers in the 1930s. By sitting down on the job and occupying a factory, workers could force the bosses to recognize the legal right of workers to unionize. In 1936, the workers at the Fan Steel Metallurgical Corporation plant in North Chicago were fed up with management and decided they wanted to form a union. In an attempt to weaken support and intimidate workers, the company bosses sent their spies to union meetings and they refused to negotiate. Frustrated with these tactics, 95 workers seized control of 2 of the company's buildings and sat down. Strike-breaking police attempted to dislodge the workers with tear gas, but the workers held fast and stayed in the building for more than a week until police chased them out. 37 workers were convicted on criminal charges, although there had been no damage to the factory property. The striking workers were fired and replaced by the company. The workers took their case to the National Labor Review Board, claiming that Fan Steel had violated the workers' rights to unionize as guaranteed under the National Labor Relations Act. They argued the sit-down strikers should get their jobs back. The board ultimately found in favor of the workers. Appeals by the company brought the case all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. The court ruled the sit-down strikers were out of bounds, and their actions amounted to an illegal usurpation of private property. Thus, good cause to fire the workers. With this one ruling, the court undercut one of the most powerful tactics workers had available to them, which helped build the modern labor movement in the United States. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2. Back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, ricksmithshow.com. Questions, comments, something on your mind, email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. So, remember during the State of the Union, the president talked about going after junk fees? And again, it's one of those things that I've been saying for a long time. These corporations have been getting away with literally robbing us blind. If you want to go to a concert anywhere in this country, you're paying massive fees. $50, $60 in some cases, which is just $70 in some cases, which is just nuts. And in fact, I just saw the thing, Live Nation and Ticketmaster had their best, most profitable year ever because they're gouging the you-know-what out of all of us. And to have the administration finally go, hey, we've got to do something about this. We've got to do something to protect consumers. Makes me happy. If you've flown recently, you've seen that the fees there are crazy. When they first came out, I remember when they first came out with baggage fees, and there wasn't the kind of hue and cry that I would have expected. People were like, oh, okay, then I'll just, I'll figure out how to game the system. We'll do more carry-ons, stuff like that. Last time I flew, we went to Alaska. And, I thought we had booked seats, all four of us together. They put 3 of us and then one, somewhere, away from us. And you're going, wait a second. There's a way to put all 4 of us in the same area. How come you didn't? Well, you go, well, you didn't pay for the upgraded service of that. Well, now it turns out that United has now introduced a new family seating policy that's going to allow families to sit together. Now, children have to be under 12 years old. We're not going to guarantee those 13-year-olds, which would have meant my daughter would have had to. And look, she wanted to sit away from us anyway because they're teenagers. That's what they do. But they've announced, free of charge. You got kids under 12, they can sit next to you. Isn't that refreshing? That corporate America, now under the threat of we're going to come after you, has voluntarily decided that they're going to do the right thing. And I'm telling you, I think a lot of this is going to start happening as the administration starts going, hey, we're going to be looking at what you're doing to consumers. Because, the weird thing is in the wild, wild world of deregulation and allow corporate America to screw over consumers. Because remember, now again, for my conservative friends who love the Roberts Court, remember in the Concepcion case that, basically forced, arbitration agreements on consumers. They also said that it was okay to cheat consumers if you just cheat them a little bit by saying no class action suits. That's basically saying, hey, if you can cheat 1 million people out of $20 by charging them for free phones, yes, that's what it was about. That's okay. Because nobody's going to come after you and file a federal lawsuit over $20. But if you get a couple million people to file a federal lawsuit over $20, like some legal firms have done, well, that's bad. And corporate America got the message. So we can screw consumers a little bit, just a little bit. We won't screw them bigly, to use a Trump word, because they may come after us. This is that kind of thing. And this is where the fees started going crazy. I mean, you look at, where most of us get nickeled and dimed to death, and it's not even nickeled and dimed anymore. It's 20s and 50s. People are tired of it. People are angry. And this is where government can show that it has power to stand up to corporate America. Because that's what they should be doing. Now, they're pushing this idea of a Junk Fee Prevention Act, which, understand, I doubt is going to pass the House, because you've got, the free market people who, think that, hey, you should have to pay those. And look, there's part of me that goes, reality is nobody should buy a concert ticket. No one should pay those exorbitant fees, but we still do. Because, we don't have to. I remember standing in line at the venue, waiting to get tickets from the venue. And those tickets being $10. Not $100, $200, $400 to see a concert. It's crazy what the consolidation and the monopolization of the ticket industry has done in this country. And it's screwing over the performers as well. Because again, that money doesn't generally go to them. It goes to the promoters and the ticket people and the venue people. The folks who are doing the concerts, they're not making the huge money. And they're getting screwed on the back end because all their music's still getting ripped off by the Spotifys of the world. Corporate America is screwing us daily. What we need a government who's going to stand up for us, because the free market certainly isn't going to do it. Want to hear your thoughts? Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Remember, if you miss any portion of the program, you can always download the podcast wherever you get your favorite podcasts, from iTunes to Stitcher to Podbean and everywhere in between. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you back here next time.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Email Rick at rick@thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people